everyone. If you've just joined us, it's great to see you this morning. We are continuing through the book of Philippians, and if you have a Bible, I encourage you to open it and go to Philippians chapter 3, and I'm going to start in verse 15. I'll give you some time to get there. Some of you are already prepped. So this is what Paul is, remember, he's writing to this church. He's writing from probably potentially a Roman prison or a prison of some kind. And he is writing to this church in Philippi that he loves a lot. He helped plant this church, that started with Lydia and a jailer and his family and a girl who was possessed by a demon that told the future. And that's quite an interesting church planting team to begin with. And it's grown from there. And this is what he wants to say to them. So last week, Al went through this verse. I press on toward the goal of the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. And then Paul goes on to say this in verse 15. Let those of us who are mature think this way. And if in anything you think otherwise, God will reveal that also to you. Only let us hold true to what we have attained. Brothers and sisters, join in imitating me and keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example you have in us. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of reflections that I was having on this verse about imitation. And the two kind of questions I wanted to pose to you this morning, hopefully they're not too challenging for an early morning, is the question of who are you imitating? And secondly, is your life one worthy of imitation? Very deep, I know, for this time in the morning. But I wanted just to put those questions to you, because one of the things that Paul does, and it can seem a bit strange to us, because we wouldn't often say to someone, hey, you need to imitate me. You need to do what I'm doing. Your life needs to look like mine. That can seem, for us living in a British culture in the 21st century, that can feel very, very odd and slightly arrogant, and just slightly like, it just feels really weird that you wouldn't say that to somebody. We've all, and I think that comes from a sense that, well, we've all got our different lives to lead. We're all our own individuals. No one should imitate anybody else. We should all just be who we are and all just sort of seek to find our true selves in that. And that sort of mindset of that kind of individual, the most important thing is that I self-actualize who I am as an individual rather than imitate someone else, would be very foreign to the writers of the Bible in a lot of ways. For them, the culture of imitating was fairly standard practice. That was how you learned. That was how you grew. So in Jesus's time in Israel, when we read about Jesus had his disciples, and a key part of discipleship when Jesus gathered the disciples, the word disciple that we translate as disciple, it really meant this idea of being a pupil, being a learner, being somebody who spent their life with a rabbi, a teacher. And what would happen was, usually it was the students who would pick the teacher, and they would, you would go, let's say you're growing up in ancient Israel, and you would go to Torah school and you would learn, you would recite the Torah, and if you were really, really good at that, you would probably learn the Torah off by heart. which is quite a feat. And then after that, you would eventually, if you were really wanting to seek and live a life dedicated to God, you would want to find a rabbi, and you would follow this rabbi around. You would eat, sleep, and just be around him all the time. And you would take what they would call like their yoke upon you. And Jesus uses this language as well. And the yoke was something used for ploughing. It was like for farm animals, they would put a yoke on them, and they would plough it along. But in this case, it meant more of you're taking their teaching upon you. You're taking the lifestyle that they've modeled to you. And that was why it was important that they would be with their teacher, with their rabbi. They spent time with their rabbi, and they would just learn from what he did. How did he speak? How did he talk? How did he interact in situations? And they would then seek to imitate that example. So much so that people would, you would have arguments and discourses, and someone would begin to share an opinion, and they would go, you sound like you're one of his disciples. And they could sort of tell that they were one of a disciple of a certain, let's say you've been following Rabbi Josiah around. And they could say, you seem to argue and speak a little bit like Rabbi Josiah used to speak, because they'd been imitating his example. And this is even said of Jesus's followers in the book of Acts. Do you remember that there's that time when Peter and John have been arrested, and they're speaking about Jesus, and it says that the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, they could tell that these men had been with Jesus. They could just tell it. They could see that the way that they spoke, the way that they lived, the way that they acted was similar to the way that Jesus spoke, the way that Jesus acted, the way that Jesus was. So that element of imitation was very much in the culture. And I kind of think I was reflecting on this. It's still very much a part of what we do today. And how we teach today, it's one of the main ways that we actually learn as human beings is still by imitation, in a very fundamental sense. So I was out with Tally yesterday. We went for our little sort of our day trip out, which we're allowed once a day. And we went out and we were sort of picking flowers and looking at trees. And naturally, the way I am with Tally is I'll pick a flower, and I'll pick up the flower and I'll just go, Tally, flower, flower, flower. And then she'll just go, bower, or something like that, and some sort of expression of that word. And I'll just keep repeating it, and I say, right, repeat after me. And I'll point at things. I'll be like, tree, and I'll sort of hit the tree, because I'm wanting her to imitate me. I'm wanting her to imitate that example. And similarly, this isn't just true for children of how we want them to imitate us and the example that we give, but it's true for, when you're learning to play an instrument. If you've ever learned to play an instrument, often the way we'll do that is we'll have a teacher, and they'll sit down and say, right, if you're playing guitar, right, your fingers, put them in this position, imitate what I'm doing, and and you'll play, you're imitating that example, that teacher that they are teaching you how to play that instrument. And you can apply the same thing for, hit workout videos, if that's your thing. You're imitating the person on screen, or whatever thing you're learning or trying to grow in. Imitation, I would say, is still the main way that we grow and we change and we learn and develop new habits and new ways of being. Is not actually by trying to find the truth within ourselves, but it's finding someone who's walked that road before, finding someone who seems to be doing well, or seems to be like has gone through that, and then following that person, imitating that example. And so why have I spoken so long about that? I think I just sort of came to my realization that all of us are imitating someone. We all have different things that we imitate, whether we realize it or often subconsciously we might be doing that. And I see this in my life. So I realize that when I'm feeling stressed, and Tally, is screaming and is being really, not a happy baby. I think a couple of days ago, I just turned around and I went, Tally, shush, like that. And I gave a look to Tally, and I paused, and after that I went, that was the same look that my dad used to give me when he would say that to me. Literally the same look, the same tone of voice. And I was like, oh my goodness, I am imitating the example that I was set by my dad. And there's some everyone's a mixed bag, so there are some good things that we take from the people that we imitate, but it made me realize, oh, in that moment I'm subconsciously imitating this example that is a negative one, that is one that doesn't demonstrate, it doesn't look like Jesus. It actually looks, it comes from sin. It comes from a heart that is angry, and it doesn't come from a good place, and it's not loving towards my daughter in that moment. And it wasn't the fact that I told her off, but it was the manner in which I did it. It was the tone of voice. It was the look, and it just and I realized, oh my goodness, I'm imitating that example. And so I guess that's my first kind of question, which is a bit of a challenging one this morning. But who are you imitating? What in your life, in the habits, maybe in the midst of this crisis, the way that we respond to things almost subconsciously can be an imitation of something that we've picked up, something that we've seen in others. Sometimes we can imitate those around us. Maybe it's our siblings. Maybe that's, I'm sure for a lot of us we can resonate with seeing bits of our parents in ourselves. Or maybe we're imitating the culture, the way that the culture sort of thinks, and sort of watching news feeds. We can also shape our lives around that as well. But I think in this letter that Paul is writing, he has this confidence to say to the Philippians, and I read it again. He says to them, brothers and sisters, in verse 17, join in imitating me. Join in imitating me. It's as if Paul's saying, I've found a way to live life. I found a hope and a joy and a peace. I found a way to navigate this life, and it's in Jesus. And in another place Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Jesus. And for us, we can imitate Jesus too. We can look at his life and see, okay, Jesus, how can I walk through this life, especially at this time of, we're living in lockdown, things are difficult. I think this could be a really good opportunity for us all to think, okay, what are some of the habits in my life that I've picked up from other places? And what are some of the things that I can put into my life that come from Jesus, that I see in Jesus? And Paul is confident to tell the Philippian church that he's done this, that he's living a life worthy of imitation. He's saying, I want you to join in imitating me, and I want you to keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example you have in us. So Paul's not just saying imitate me, but he's also saying, and keep your eyes on other people. Because one of the great things that we can do as the body together, as the church, is when I hear a story of how one of you guys is, persevering in faith under difficult circumstances, and there's, all of you have stories of that. I want to look to that and go, that there's something there which I can imitate. I can think, oh, they've done that. That gives me a bit, something of an example to follow. It doesn't have to be a perfect example, because we're not perfect. We will get things wrong. But there's enough in the way that we respond to Jesus. There's all of us can have things, I believe, that people can look and say, I've walked through this, and God's been faithful, and he's been true. You can too. You can walk through this in this similar way.